Thomas had stood guard at the palace gates for 15 years. His weathered hands gripped the ceremonial spear with the same steady confidence they had since he first took the oath of loyalty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as he watched the royal carriage approach. Inside sat the woman who would become queen within the hour, yet something deep in his chest twisted with unease. The old queen had died just 3 months ago. Queen Isabella had been more than a ruler to Thomas. She had been the mother he never had. When he arrived at the palace as a frightened boy of 16, orphaned and desperate for work, she had personally overseen his training. She taught him that loyalty meant more than following orders blindly. It meant protecting what was right even when the cost was high. Now as the carriage wheels clattered to a stop, Thomas studied the face of Lady Margaret, soon to be Queen Margaret. Her cold blue eyes swept over the assembled guards with calculating precision. There was no warmth in her expression, no acknowledgement of the men who would risk their lives to protect her. She stepped from the carriage with practiced grace, her emerald dress rustling against the stone steps. The coronation ceremony proceeded with all the expected grandeur. Lords and ladies filled the great hall, their jewels catching the light from hundreds of candles. Thomas stood at attention near the main entrance, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of threat. But his mind wandered to the conversations he had overheard in recent weeks. Whispers in dark corners about Lady Margaret's true intentions. Stories from her family's estate about servants who had disappeared after questioning her orders. When the crown was placed upon her head, the crowd erupted in cheers. Thomas remained silent. His fellow guards glanced at him with confusion, but he could not bring himself to celebrate. The memory of Queen Isabella's final words to him echoed in his mind. "Promise me, Thomas, that you will never forget who you truly serve. Not a crown, not a title, but the people of this kingdom." As the new queen turned to face her subjects, her eyes found Thomas among the guards. For a moment their gazes locked. She raised an eyebrow, clearly noting his lack of enthusiasm. A thin smile played at the corners of her mouth, but there was ice in her expression. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool palace air. The celebration feast lasted well into the night. Thomas maintained his post, watching as nobles bowed and scraped before their new ruler. He noticed how quickly some of them changed their allegiances. The same people who had spoken fondly of Queen Isabella now praising Margaret's fresh vision for the kingdom. It disgusted him. Near midnight, as the last of the guests stumbled from the hall, Queen Margaret approached the guard station. Her ladies-in-waiting followed at a respectful distance, but Thomas could see the nervousness in their eyes. The Queen's reputation had preceded her. "Captain," she addressed the head of the guard, ignoring Thomas completely, "I trust all my protectors understand their duties to their new sovereign." "Yes, Your Majesty," Captain Morrison replied with a sharp bow. "We live to serve the crown." "Excellent." Her voice was smooth as silk, but Thomas heard the underlying steel. "I expect complete loyalty from every man under this roof. Those who cannot adapt to new leadership may find themselves uncomfortable in their positions." The threat was clear. Thomas felt his jaw clench, but he maintained his stoic expression. This was only the beginning, he realized. The real test of his principles lay ahead, and he suspected Queen Margaret would not make it easy for anyone who dared to stand against her will. The first test came sooner than Thomas expected. 3 days after the coronation, Queen Margaret summoned all the palace guards to the throne room. She sat regally upon the golden throne that had been Queen Isabella's, but somehow it looked different now. Colder, more intimidating. "My faithful protectors," she began, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "I have called you here to discuss changes that will take effect immediately. The old ways died with the old queen. We must embrace a new era of strength and order." Thomas stood in the back row with the other senior guards, his expression carefully neutral. Around him, younger guards shifted nervously, unsure what to expect from their new ruler. "From this day forward," Queen Margaret continued, "any citizen who fails to show proper respect to the crown will face immediate punishment. Guards will enforce a new protocol. All subjects must bow when I pass, without exception. Those who refuse will spend 3 days in the dungeons." A murmur rippled through the assembled guards. Thomas felt his stomach turn. Queen Isabella had never demanded such elaborate displays of submission. She had walked among her people freely, speaking with merchants and farmers as equals. This new rule would create fear, not respect. Furthermore, the Queen's voice grew sharper. I am informed that some citizens have been spreading rumors about my family's past. Such talk borders on treason. Any guard who hears such gossip and fails to report it will be considered complicit. Captain Morrison stepped forward and bowed deeply. Your Majesty, we understand completely. Your will shall be our command. Good. Queen Margaret's smile was predatory. Now, to demonstrate your loyalty, I want each of you to kneel and pledge your allegiance to me personally. Not to the crown, not to the kingdom, but to me. One by one, the guards approached the throne and knelt. Thomas watched with growing horror as his colleagues surrendered their independence to this woman. When his turn came, he walked slowly to the front of the room. The Queen's eyes glittered with anticipation. Thomas stopped 3 feet from the throne. The entire room fell silent. Queen Margaret leaned forward slightly, waiting for him to kneel. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. I pledged my loyalty to the true crown 15 years ago, Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. That oath was given freely to a queen who served her people. I will not kneel to tyranny. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Several guards reached for their weapons, unsure whether to arrest Thomas or protect him. Queen Margaret's face flushed red with rage, but she maintained her composure. How dare you? She whispered, her voice deadly calm.
I am your queen.
You will kneel or you will face the consequences. Thomas straightened his shoulders. I serve the people of this kingdom, Your Majesty. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, so be it. The tension in the room was suffocating. Captain Morrison looked mortified, caught between his loyalty to his subordinate and his duty to the crown. Some of the younger guards appeared confused, while others nodded slightly in agreement with Thomas's stand. Queen Margaret stood slowly from her throne, her emerald dress rustling ominously. Captain Morrison, arrest this insubordinate fool immediately. He will spend a week in the dungeons to consider his attitude. Your Majesty, Morrison began hesitantly. Perhaps, did I stutter? The Queen snapped. Arrest him now or join him in chains. As 2 reluctant guards moved toward Thomas, he offered no resistance. He had made his choice and he would accept the consequences. But as they led him away, he caught the eyes of several guards who looked troubled by what they had witnessed. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and Thomas suspected this was far from over. The dungeon doors clanged shut behind him, but Thomas felt no regret. Queen Isabella would have been proud of his stand, and that knowledge gave him strength to face whatever punishment awaited him in the days ahead. The dungeon cell was cold and damp, with only a thin stream of sunlight filtering through a barred window high above. Thomas sat on the rough stone floor, his back against the wall, trying to preserve his strength. The guards had brought him water and stale bread twice a day, but no one had spoken to him since his arrest. On the 3rd day, he heard footsteps approaching. Thomas expected another silent guard with his meager meal, but instead Captain Morrison appeared outside the iron bars. The older man looked haggard, his usually pristine uniform wrinkled and his face drawn with worry. Thomas, Morrison whispered, glancing around nervously. Are you all right? I'm alive, Thomas replied simply. That's more than some can say these days. Morrison's expression darkened. Things have gotten worse since you've been down here. Much worse. The Queen has already implemented her new rules and the people are terrified. Yesterday she had an old merchant thrown in the stocks for failing to bow quickly enough when her carriage passed. Thomas felt his anger flare, but he kept his voice steady. And the guards? How are they handling these orders? Most are following them without question, Morrison admitted shamefully. They're scared, Thomas. The Queen made it clear that disobedience means dismissal at best, imprisonment at worst. But a few of us, we remember what Queen Isabella stood for. What are you really here to tell me, Captain? Morrison leaned closer to the bars. The Queen has bigger plans than public humiliation. I overheard her speaking with Lord Blackwood yesterday. They're planning to raise taxes by 50% to fund a new army. She wants to expand the kingdom's borders, starting with the peaceful villages to the north. Thomas's blood ran cold. Those villages had been allies for generations, trading partners who trusted the kingdom's protection. Queen Isabella had signed treaties promising their independence. There's more, Morrison continued. She's bringing in foreign mercenaries to supplement our forces. Men with no loyalty to our people or our traditions. I think she plans to replace guards like us entirely. Then why are you still following her orders? Morrison's shoulders sagged. Because I'm a coward, Thomas. I have a wife and children to think about. But watching you stand up to her, it reminded me of what we swore to protect when we first took our oaths. Before Thomas could respond, they heard approaching footsteps. Morrison quickly stepped back from the cell, adjusting his uniform and adopting a professional stance. A moment later, Queen Margaret herself appeared, flanked by two heavily armed mercenaries Thomas had never seen before. "Captain Morrison," she said coolly, "I don't recall giving you permission to visit the prisoner." "Your Majesty, I was conducting a routine inspection of the dungeons," Morrison lied smoothly. "How thorough of you." Her tone suggested she didn't believe him. "Leave us. I wish to speak with our stubborn guard privately." Morrison hesitated for a moment, then bowed and retreated. His footsteps echoed down the corridor until they faded completely. Queen Margaret approached the cell, studying Thomas with the same calculating expression she had worn during the coronation. The mercenaries remained at a respectful distance, but their hands rested on their sword hilts. "7 days have passed, Thomas," she said softly. "Have you had time to reconsider your position?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "My position hasn't changed, Your Majesty." Such stubborn pride. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Do you know what I've learned about you during your stay here? You have no family, no close friends outside the guard. Your entire life has been devoted to this palace and its protection. How sad that such devotion is wasted on the wrong ideals." Queen Isabella's ideals weren't wrong. "Isabella is dead," Margaret snapped, her composure slipping for a moment. "Her weak leadership nearly bankrupted this kingdom. Her pathetic kindness made us vulnerable to our enemies. I will not repeat her mistakes." Thomas remained silent, recognizing the futility of arguing with someone so convinced of their own righteousness. "I'm going to make you an offer," the Queen continued, regaining her calm. "Kneel before me now, pledge your loyalty, and I will not only release you but promote you to captain of my personal guard. Refuse and you will spend the rest of your life in this cell. Choose wisely, Thomas. This is your last chance." The offer hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. Thomas could see the calculation in her eyes, the belief that everyone had a price. She truly thought she could buy his principles with power and freedom. Thomas slowly stood up, his joints stiff from days on the cold stone floor. For a moment, hope flickered in the Queen's eyes. Then Thomas spoke, his voice clear and unwavering. "I would rather die free than live as your slave." Queen Margaret's face twisted with rage at Thomas's refusal. Her carefully maintained mask of royal composure finally cracked, revealing the cruel woman beneath. She stepped back from the cell, her hands trembling with anger. "So be it," she hissed. "Guard," she called to one of her mercenaries. "This traitor will receive no more food or water. Let him consider his choices as he slowly wastes away." As she turned to leave, Thomas called out to her, "Your Majesty, may I ask you something?" She paused but didn't turn around. "Speak quickly. What happened to make you so afraid of your own people that you need foreign soldiers to protect you?" The question struck home. Margaret whirled around, her eyes blazing. "Afraid? I fear nothing. I am bringing order to chaos, strength to weakness, something your precious Isabella never understood. Isabella walked among the people without fear because they loved her. You hide behind mercenaries because you know what you're becoming." "Silence," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the dungeon walls. "You know nothing of leadership, nothing of the burdens of the crown." With that, she stormed away, her heels clicking angrily against the stone floor. The mercenaries followed, leaving Thomas alone once more. But her reaction told him everything he needed to know. Beneath all her cruelty and ambition, Queen Margaret was indeed afraid. Days passed without food or water. Thomas grew weaker, but his resolve remained unshaken. On what he estimated was the 4th day of his punishment, he heard something unexpected. Soft footsteps approached his cell and a young voice whispered his name. "Sir Thomas, are you awake?" Thomas opened his eyes to see Peter, one of the newest guards, barely 18 years old. The boy was carrying a water skin and a small bundle of food, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Peter," Thomas croaked, his voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." "I know, sir, but this isn't right." "You're the best man in the entire guard. Captain Morrison sent me, but even if he hadn't, I would have come anyway." The boy passed the water through the bars, and Thomas drank gratefully. The cool liquid felt like salvation flowing down his parched throat. "Tell me what's happening above," Thomas whispered after eating some bread. Peter's young face was grim. "It's getting worse every day, sir. The Queen's new taxes have the people furious. 3 families were thrown out of their homes yesterday for refusing to pay. And the mercenaries. They're not like us, sir. They enjoy hurting people. Thomas's heart ached for his people. What about the other guards? How are they handling all this? Some are following orders without question, but others are starting to ask questions. Marcus said something yesterday about the old days being better. Even Captain Morrison looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. Peter, listen to me carefully. You must not do anything reckless. The Queen is dangerous, and she won't hesitate to destroy anyone who opposes her. But, sir, we can't just let her destroy everything Queen Isabella built. Before Thomas could respond, they heard boots marching down the corridor. Peter's eyes widened in panic. Hide that food, Thomas whispered urgently. Go now! Peter scrambled away just as 2 of the Queen's mercenaries appeared. They looked suspiciously at Thomas, noting that he appeared slightly stronger than expected. You've been receiving help, one of them accused with a thick foreign accent. Thomas remained silent, meeting their suspicious glares with steady eyes. No matter, the second mercenary said with an ugly laugh. The Queen has new orders for you. Tomorrow, you will be brought before the entire court. She wants to make an example of your stubborn defiance. They left without another word, leaving Thomas to contemplate what fresh humiliation awaited him. But despite his physical weakness, he felt a spark of hope. Young Peter's visit had shown him that Queen Isabella's legacy wasn't completely dead. There were still those in the palace who remembered what true service meant. That night, Thomas heard something that filled his heart with both pride and fear. Quiet conversations echoed through the stone walls as guards whispered to each other about the situation above. Some voices he recognized spoke of duty and honor, while others expressed doubt about their current path. A resistance was forming, Thomas realized. The question was whether it would be enough to save the kingdom from Queen Margaret's destructive ambitions. And tomorrow, when he faced her court, he would have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the people he had sworn to serve. The seeds of rebellion were being sown in the darkness, and Thomas found himself at the center of a storm that would determine the fate of everyone he cared about. The Great Hall had never felt so ominous. Thomas was dragged in by 2 mercenaries, his wrists bound with iron shackles that had been rusted by years of use on previous prisoners. His legs were weak from days without proper food, but he forced himself to stand tall as he faced the assembled court. Queen Margaret sat on her throne like a predator surveying her territory. The nobles who had once laughed and celebrated during Queen Isabella's reign now sat in stiff silence, their faces masks of forced loyalty. Thomas could see the fear in their eyes, the same terror that had infected the palace guards. Bring the traitor forward, the Queen commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. As Thomas was pushed toward the throne, he noticed Captain Morrison standing with the other guards along the wall. The older man's face was carefully neutral, but Thomas caught a slight nod of acknowledgement. Other familiar faces dotted the crowd of guards, many of whom had served alongside him for years. Citizens of the court, Queen Margaret announced, rising from her throne with theatrical grandeur. You are here to witness the consequences of defying your rightful sovereign. This man, Thomas Hartwell, has refused to acknowledge my authority and show proper respect to the crown. She began to pace back and forth in front of the throne, her emerald dress sweeping dramatically across the marble floor. For too long, this kingdom has tolerated insubordination and weak leadership. No more. Today begins a new era of absolute order. Thomas listened to her speech with growing disgust. Every word revealed her true nature more clearly. She wasn't interested in serving the kingdom. She wanted the kingdom to serve her. Thomas Hartwell, she said, stopping directly in front of him. You have one final opportunity to save yourself. Kneel before me, beg for forgiveness, and publicly renounce your foolish loyalty to the dead queen. Do this and I will show mercy. The hall fell silent. Every eye was fixed on Thomas, waiting to see if he would finally break under the pressure. He could feel the weight of expectation, the desperate hope from some quarters that he would find a way to survive. Thomas looked around the room, taking in the faces of people he had protected for 15 years. He saw Lord Hampton, who had once praised Queen Isabella's wisdom but now cowered in fear of her successor. He saw Lady Catherine, who had wept genuine tears at the old Queen's funeral, but now applauded Margaret's cruel policies. But he also saw other faces, Young Peter stood among the guards, his jaw set with determination that reminded Thomas of his own youth. Captain Morrison watched with barely concealed admiration. Several nobles in the back rows looked troubled by the proceedings, their consciences clearly warring with their survival instincts. "Well?" Queen Margaret demanded impatiently. "I'm waiting for your answer." Thomas took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the great hall. "Your Majesty, I have served this kingdom faithfully for 15 years. I have protected its people, defended its borders, and upheld its laws. But I cannot and will not serve a tyrant who seeks to destroy everything that makes this kingdom worth defending." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats while the guards exchanged meaningful glances. Queen Margaret's face flushed purple with rage. "How dare you call me a tyrant? I am bringing strength to this weak kingdom." "Strength?" Thomas replied, his voice growing stronger despite his physical weakness. "You rule through fear, not respect. You tax the people into poverty to fund armies for wars they never wanted. You replace loyal guards with foreign mercenaries who care nothing for our traditions. That isn't strength, Your Majesty. That's cowardice." The Queen raised her hand to strike him, but Thomas continued speaking, his words ringing with conviction. "Queen Isabella taught me that true loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous. She believed that a ruler should serve the people, not the other way around." "Isabella was weak," Margaret shrieked. "She nearly destroyed this kingdom with her pathetic kindness." "She built something beautiful," Thomas replied quietly. "And you're tearing it down because you're too small to understand its value." The insult hit its mark. Queen Margaret's composure shattered completely. She drew a dagger from her belt, its blade gleaming in the candlelight. "You want to die a martyr for your precious Isabella? So be it, guards, hold him steady." But something unexpected happened. The mercenaries moved forward as ordered, but several of the palace guards stepped between them and Thomas. Captain Morrison was among them, his sword half drawn. "Your Majesty," Morrison said carefully, "this man deserves a fair trial, not summary execution. Stand down." "Captain," the Queen snarled, "or join him in death." Morrison looked around the room, seeing other guards moving to support him. Young Peter had his hand on his sword hilt. Even some of the nobles were rising from their seats, their faces showing the first signs of open rebellion. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Morrison said firmly, "but I cannot allow you to murder a good man in cold blood. That isn't justice. That isn't what this kingdom stands for." The great hall erupted into chaos as loyalties divided, and the first cracks appeared in Queen Margaret's reign of terror. Thomas watched with amazement as the seeds of rebellion he had planted finally began to sprout, knowing that whatever happened next, he had already won the most important victory of all. The confrontation in the Great Hall lasted only minutes, but those moments changed everything. Queen Margaret found herself facing a room divided, with roughly half the palace guard standing behind Captain Morrison and Thomas, while her mercenaries formed a defensive circle around the throne. "This is treason," she screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "All of you will hang for this." But her words carried less weight now. The spell of fear she had cast over the palace was breaking, and people were remembering who they truly were. Lord Hampton, the same man who had cowered before her just minutes earlier, stood up from his seat. "Your Majesty," he said with newfound courage, "perhaps it's time to reconsider your approach. The people are suffering under these new policies." "Silence!" Margaret raged, but more voices joined in. "The taxes are too high," called out Lady Catherine. "Families are losing their homes." "The mercenaries terrorize innocent citizens," added another noble. Queen Margaret looked around the room with growing panic as she realized her support was crumbling. She had ruled through intimidation, but intimidation only worked when people believed in your power. Now, seeing palace guards openly defying her, the courtiers were finding their own courage. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his sword now fully drawn but pointed toward the ground in a gesture of respect rather than threat. "Your Majesty, I propose a solution that might serve everyone's interests. I don't negotiate with traitors." "Then perhaps," said a new voice from the back of the hall, "you should negotiate with the people." Every head turned to see an elderly man walking slowly down the center aisle. Thomas recognized him immediately as Lord Edmund, Queen Isabella's most trusted advisor who had supposedly retired after her death. The old man moved with purpose, his ceremonial staff clicking against the marble floor. Lord Edmund, Queen Margaret said uncertainly. What are you doing here? I have been watching, Your Majesty, waiting to see if you would grow into the role, or let it corrupt you. I'm afraid the answer is now clear. He stopped in front of the throne and faced the assembled court. Queen Isabella left specific instructions in her will regarding the succession. Instructions that were never made public because we hoped they wouldn't be necessary. Thomas felt his heart leap. Queen Isabella had been famous for her foresight and careful planning. Lord Edmund continued. She decreed that if her chosen successor proved unfit to rule, the crown should pass to a council of regents until a proper heir could be found. The criteria for unfitness included ruling through fear, oppressing the common people, and placing personal ambition above the kingdom's welfare. That's impossible, Queen Margaret shrieked. I am the rightful queen. You were given the opportunity to prove yourself worthy, Lord Edmund replied calmly. Instead, you have proven the opposite. He turned to address the entire court. I call for a vote of no confidence in Queen Margaret's rule, as provided for in Queen Isabella's final decree. The vote was swift and decisive. Nearly 3/4 of the assembled nobles supported the motion, with many of the remaining quarter abstaining rather than openly supporting the Queen. When Captain Morrison asked for the guard's opinion, the result was even more overwhelming. Queen Margaret stood frozen in shock as her reign crumbled around her. The mercenaries looked uncertain, their foreign loyalties worthless in the face of a unified domestic opposition. This isn't over, she screamed as palace guards moved to escort her from the throne. You'll regret this, all of you. But her threats fell on deaf ears. The damage was done and everyone in the room knew it. As the chaos subsided, Thomas found himself surrounded by his fellow guards, many of whom clasped his shoulders or shook his hand. Captain Morrison approached with a key to his shackles. I should have stood up to her from the beginning, Morrison said quietly as he freed Thomas's wrists. You showed us what real courage looks like. We all found our courage when it mattered most, Thomas replied. That's what Queen Isabella would have wanted. Young Peter appeared at his side, grinning widely. Sir Thomas, Lord Edmund wants to speak with you. He says Queen Isabella left specific instructions about people like you. As Thomas walked toward the elderly advisor, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had kept his promise to Queen Isabella, protecting not just her memory but the values she had tried to instill in her kingdom. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in months it held hope rather than fear. Lord Edmund greeted him with a warm smile. Thomas Hartwell, Queen Isabella wrote extensively about you in her private journals. She said you understood the true meaning of loyalty better than anyone else in the palace. Would you be willing to serve on the Council of Regents? Your voice would be valuable as we work to heal the damage done to our kingdom. Thomas looked around the great hall, seeing faces filled with hope and determination instead of fear and desperation. Outside the tall windows he could see palace staff spreading the news to the crowds gathered in the courtyard. Soon the entire kingdom would know that their long nightmare was over. It would be an honor, Thomas said simply, for Queen Isabella and for the people we serve. The palace guard who had refused to kneel to tyranny now stood ready to help rebuild what had almost been lost. In the end, his unwavering principles had not just saved his own soul, but had helped save his kingdom as well.